Superversive Livestream. I am here with our very special guest, John C. Wright, and my co host, Anthony Marquetta. Mr. Wright, how are you doing today?
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm doing just fine. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I just told you I was doing well.
Excellent.
So, how was your
So,
trip to England?
oh, it was great. I've been telling your wife all about it, and answering her questions, and I will certainly ask her about her own wonderful trip eventually too. However, what we're here for is something much more near and dear to our hearts. It is the fundamental drive as to why I stay interested in this world at all, and that is, of course, books, literature, art. Art itself, the inspiration of the muse, of the Holy Spirit coming down on earth and reaching out to us through a medium of ink and paper. And of
Amen,
course,
brother.
I am foaming at the mouth at the pulpit. And of course, we have a new release from yourself, sir. Starquest, the Space Pirates of Andromeda. A new nail in the Star Wars coffin, the final word in pulp, space, empire fiction, science fantasy, space opera.
I trust you are still loyal members of the Pulp Revolution, which is ongoing. Am I correct in this?
Of course. Though it's one of those things where the movement ever evolves. Uh, there's some interesting work being done. I'll tell you about it later. But
That's
uh,
what we do.
uh,
Is there a way we could put
hmm?
an image of my cover up on the screen? I sent you one earlier.
Yes. So the screen you're seeing in Streamyard is completely disconnected to
Hmm.
what the audience is seeing in on their screens. I have a
Spooky.
little video game that I play for the more ADHD among us, and then, of course, your book covers on the right side.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to be taking second fiddle to your video game.
Listen, well, third fiddle,
StarQuest
maybe, but,
is
you know.
StarQuest, as you just said, is my attempt to continue to nail the undead corpse of Star Wars into its coffin, because at one time it was a lovely bride and one of my favorite, if not my favorite franchise. The first two and a half movies were just simply excellent. The third one had too many Muppets, but I still liked it. It still had a redemption arc. It was still space opera in the grandest scale. The prequels were okay. I thought they were bad at the time, but then compared to what Disney did with Star Wars, they seem wonderful in hindsight. You say
Yes.
so. So StarQuest got started when I saw The Last Jedi, and The Last Jedi was for me the last straw. And I was so outraged that I sat down to type a column in my blog, and the column turned into a book, which is for sale even now, which on Amazon, which is just a nonfiction book. It's an analysis of everything that went wrong with that movie. But as a joke on my blog, I wrote a pretend uh, uh, review of the movie they didn't make, which they would have made if they had asked me to write it. See, so I made up all these scenes and all this action, all this cool stuff. And the fan, and of course, as the joke was that at the end of the column, I say, well, that's the way the movie went in our universe, but in a nearby parallel universe that's more miserable, the movie sucks. And of course, that's when the reader realized that the movie I'm talking about doesn't exist in this universe, the ones we're in. We're trapped in the universe
Right.
where Last Straw really was bad. Uh, and so the challenge was, could I do better? Well, I took a few years. I haven't released any books in 3 to 4 years now because I've been trying to write all the books in the series before I release the first one. That way, I can release them rapidly enough to spin up some reader interest and momentum. So this one, Space Pirates of Andromeda. And by the way, if you can't tell what kind of book it is from the title, Space Pirates of Andromeda, I'm not sure how I can explain it to you. You have to like Buck Rogers. You have to like Flash Gordon. You
Mm.
have to like Dan Dare. You gotta be someone who thinks the pulps were with the watermark, the high watermark of early 20th century American science fiction literature.
Yes.
And you've got to know that you got to know what a space opera is, which is any story that starts with blowing up a planet. Star Wars is space opera because they blow up the planet Alderaan.
Yes.
See how that works?
I mean, it's quite frankly, it never feels as big, as grand, as wonderful as it should be if there isn't mass genocide on a planetary scale.
Correct.
It
Correct.
feels too small, too small-hearted.
Well, if it's military SF, they would just seed the atmosphere with radioactive dust or something and sterilize the surface.
Yes.
But in a space opera, not only do you blow the planet up, but you blow it into asteroids, driving every single mountain-sized chunk out of the gravity well, which of course the gravity still exists because the mass is not destroyed. And the amount of energy, the amount of overkill that takes to do that is clearly not just a horror weapon meant to cow the galaxy into obedience to the greatest empire, but also to throw the other planets in the solar system out of their orbits because the planet is not just destroyed but is obliterated. So that is space opera. Space opera is gigantic. It's over the top. It's grandiose. If that's what you want, this is the book for you, ladies and gentlemen. This is the book for you.
One of my all-time favorite lines in anything is from Gurren Lagann, which I know you've also seen, and it's when they're fighting the anti-spirals at the end of the show, and they take a punch from whatever, like the anti-spirals mech or whatever it is, and on Earth, like they have their guy in the booth on Earth, like watching it, and he says something that's I'm paraphrasing, but it's along the lines of, that punch contained more power than was used in the Big Bang. And then they're like, are they dead? And then someone goes, it'll take more than that to kill them. And I'm watching and going, how much more? What more could it take?
More energy than the entire sidereal universe contains. Very good.
Yes. And I'm like, so like that's literally all the energy. How much more is there?
The end of Gurren Lagann is a scene where the two mechs, each one of which is thousands of light years tall, are standing on top of a spiral galaxy, throwing lesser spiral galaxies at each other like shuriken. And I liked that scene so much that I put a parallel scene, basically beat for beat, from that in my Count to a Trillion series. But Count to a Trillion was SF, so I didn't actually play up the. I played up the astronomical magnitudes of the fight when the galaxies were flying at each other, but not the space opera of it, not the comic book feel of it. This book has more of that in it. This book has more of a lighthearted but very serious, if you can imagine that combination, attempt. No, you can imagine the combination.
Yeah.
Back was lighthearted but also very serious. You know, because the guy found out, spoilers, that his dad was the Dark Lord. See?
We were just having that conversation actually about another franchise, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and we were discussing like what made that series what it was. You know, obviously
a lot of it was just the opening song of the first season, in my opinion.
You're not wrong. The first season opening song is iconic. But part of it is like that tone of, like, yes, it can be extremely bizarre, obviously. That's like, you know, in the title. But it's also the fact that no matter how bizarre it gets, you are expected to take the story seriously.
Yeah.
Like, there's no part in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure where if a character is going to do something absurd and insane that will destroy the universe, then the stakes are the universe is going to be destroyed unless you stop him. Right? Like, and you need to treat it with the seriousness it deserves, even if your power is, you know, to use my personal favorite stand of all of them, that you can turn people into dinosaurs. Like, congratulations, you now must use this power to save the universe.
It's a great power.
That's a scary.
What I liked about it as a science fiction writer was the scene in the early parts before they ramp up to really extraordinary levels, when the guy was just using a breath control technique to summon up the mystical energy he needed to defeat his brother, the vampire. And if you shoved the guy into the water and he couldn't breathe, his power was cut off. That's the kind of thing that just appeals to me, because it shows that they are thinking through the implications of their abilities.
They make a joke like that in the show Yu Yu Hakusho, where every character, they have a tournament called the Dark Tournament, which is a very famous tournament arc. And in the tournament, a lot of the characters have these long moves that they need to do to power up. And at one point, they have like the three girls watching in the crowd, and one of them goes, he's using like 5 minutes to power up. Why don't they punch him? And the two other girls grab her and go, "How dare you, man!" Like, where it goes, do you have no sportsmanship?
So unchivalrous.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
if you cheat to win, then you don't get applause from the crowd, and no one's going to be afraid of you.
Exactly.
So let's since we're talking about it, um, let's talk about inspirations. Of course, there's Star Wars. There, you know, the fit of madness, where your beloved manservant Yamamoto had to keep you from the knife, at the cost of his own. Poor Yamamoto.
He did. We still revere Yamamoto's sacrifice in getting in the way of the suicide knife, because Last Jedi was a movie that was not just bad. It was not just poorly written. It was deliberately meant to deconstruct, which is to say, to destroy the very idea of Star Wars and the ideals of Star Wars. They took Luke Skywalker, the one iconic character of all science fictiondom who represents hope. He is not willing to give up on the Dark Lord, his father, even when the magical frog in the swamp, and even when his ghostly teacher, the wizard, tell him not to. Tell him the guy's doomed. Tell him the guy's beyond redemption. He goes in anyway. He steps into the lair of the Dark Emperor. He's in the middle of the Death Star. I mean, are you kidding me? This guy is the guy who's going to be so freaked out that he has a hunch that his nephew is evil, that he's going to try to kill him in his sleep. and then the evil nephew waves his finger at the guy and blows him through the ceiling. So he goes off and sulks on a missing planet, leaving a map back to himself, and cuts himself off from the Force. Then he uses the Force to reconnect himself to the Force, to prank the evil nephew in a final scene that makes no sense. But that uses up all his hit points, and then he dies for no reason. He turns into a ghost and fades away. This is after the magical frog blows up the library of the Jedi, which the girl doesn't need because she intuitively knows everything that a man knows, but better. Not a single story element in that movie connected with any other story element. Not the theme didn't connect with the theme. The characters didn't connect with the characters. The character arcs made no sense. The character motivations made no sense. And you could take any one of the scenes out of the middle and move it to the beginning or the end with no difference for the coherence or the lack of it of the show. Now, the movie maker there, he also did Brick. He also did Looper. He also has done good film noir shows and good science fiction shows, so he can do his thing. So that means it was deliberate. This was not done by accident. He came out from behind the screen during the showing, stepped into the third row, and then slapped me across the face. So I had to spit out my butter flavored popcorn substance all over the messy floor. That was him. It was a personal insult to me and to every fan of Star Wars. So I said to myself, you can do better than that. You know what a space opera is. You know what elements it's supposed to have in it. You know how it's supposed to be told. You know, make your main character rule number one is make your main character an orphan at the beginning to generate sympathy. I mean, am I wrong about that? Batman, orphan, yes. Superman, orphan entire planet blown up. Okay, orphan.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Frodo Baggins is actually an orphan. He's being raised by his uncle. His parents died in a boating accident. Yeah. Frodo Baggins. Yes. King Arthur's father Uther is dead. Orphan. Jesus Christ, his father is absent in heaven. Oh no, wait. That was blasphemous and not that funny. So let's just pretend I didn't say that. I don't know. Name someone else. Moses. Well, Moses' parents are alive. Actually, never mind. Yes. That makes no sense at all. Okay, actually, my theory doesn't cover every case. My theory just covers some cases. Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like, well, there must be an allowance made for biblical figures, because for some of them, they're like, when does Jesse come in to David's life, except as the father of 8 odd sons, the least of which is David, until he turns out to be the king of all of them.
Another thing you can do, which the Bible does do. I mean, regardless of the Bible as religion, the Bible as literature always tells the story of the lesser son, the forgotten son, turning out to be great. And even the pagans liked this theory, like this idea, because Hercules, who's a god, is raised by a shepherd, and so is Siegfried in the Norse epic of the Nibelungen Lied. You know,
wasn't it a blacksmith dwarf?
What's that?
Wasn't it a blacksmith dwarf for Siegfried?
He was raised. He wasn't the son of the blacksmith dwarf. In fact, he was raised by him, but his mother dies in giving
Yeah,
birth to him. Dies in the wilderness, giving birth to him. You say so?
yeah,
He's an orphan too.
it's
Siegfried.
true. I don't doubt his orphanage.
No, but I'm saying
Orphanness.
rooting for the underdog is always a pip. That's
Yes.
why in Star Wars the rebels were a small scattered alliance against an immense empire. You
Mm.
know, and I should say Star Wars, while it is has certain universal themes. I mean, everyone understands the idea of the plucky rebels against the evil empire. There's something kind of American about that, just because Han Solo was a hot rodder. I mean, basically, it was the same character he played in Lucas's earlier movie, American Graffiti. The farm boy is Clark Kent. He's the Kansas farm boy. It's just that his farm is made of sand. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
The wizard is basically the same old wizard we see in Shazam or Merlin the magician or any other wise old man. You know.
Yes.
So it's a wonderful epic, and it needed someone to do something that paid homage to it.
Mm.
Now, in my book, honestly, I changed some things. I adjusted them to put a little John Wright spin on them because while I am a kleptomaniac and I steal things, I like to steal things from the greats, from really good writers better than me, so as to make myself look better than I am. And I think I do that successfully.
Yes.
Because I've said before, good writers steal ideas from better writers, but great writers find someone else's ideas, club them over the head with a whiskey bottle, drag them into a back alley, pour the whiskey over their clothes before going through their pockets for all their ideas.
No
and then
need,
report,
sir.
and
I've
then
already.
report to the foreman that the guy was drunk on duty so that you get his job.
Right.
That's what really great writers do.
No need for the whiskey thing. I've already doused myself, sir. But
I'm not stealing from you, Mr. Wheeler. I'm stealing from George Lucas
yes.
and from Maxwell Grant and from Lee Falk and from Bill Finger, because I decided that. Well, here's the thing. I said, what does Star Wars lack? Star Wars has everything in it, but what does it not have enough of? And like in the extended universe, they had space pirates, but they didn't have them any in the first movie. So I said, okay, I got to have space pirates on stage, front and center, right at the beginning. So the story opens with my main character, the ace agent of Star Patrol, Athos Lone, crawling up the rocket tube of the space cruiser, the space raider pirate ship, the Devil's Delight, and he's got to cut through the wall of the engine block to sneak into the ship undetected, hoping no one turns on the engine while he's crawling up the tubes.
Yes.
That's the beginning. The prologue is when Lyra Centauri, my female Jedi version, has her parents killed and her whole planet and her whole solar system. You see?
Yes.
Because the bad guys, the baddies here, have a dark sun weapon which can extinguish entire stars. And I decided to use the same basic setup as The Force Awakens hits the snooze button, turns over, and goes back to sleep. You remember that movie? Where
yes.
the Galactic Empire was overthrown like 50 years ago, and retreated, and everyone thinks that they've been destroyed. Everyone thinks they're dead, but of course they're not. They're just regathering their strength. And I didn't want to call the Jedi, so I had to. And I wanted to make the Jedi Knights a little more like knights and a little less like Jedi. So I called them Templars, and I had them have a slightly different religion than the kind of Hollywood Taoism of believing in the Force that's created by life forms. And I got rid of midichlorians. I thought that was a terrible idea. but like I said, the same basic themes crop up. I don't like female warriors. I've had my fill of them. I can tolerate an occasional Wonder Woman because she's an Amazon, which is a mythical creature, or Batgirl because she's attractive. But basically, I thought the females in the Golden Order, which is what I call mine, should be something more like a shrine maiden. Should be something with a give her a magical bow that can slay demons and drive back dark spiritual forces. You know, make her something like a nun. And I gave her astral projection, and that's so she can see and talk to the space patrolman who has the second sight. He's psychic, but she can't do anything. She can't physically affect the world around her. She can give advice and crack wise. It's about it.
It's a valuable skill in these dark worlds out here.
Yeah, because she can see through walls for one thing. She can stick her head through a wall and tell them what's on the other side, things like that.
Yes.
So, in any case,
So
the
there's a
other,
famous thing that happened. Oh, I'm sorry. Finish what your
oh no,
thought there.
I was just gonna say, I was just gonna run down the main characters. Is Lyra Centauri, the Shrine Maiden? She has vowed revenge on the people that destroyed her whole planet. Now, she was actually a princess on that planet, so she's a space princess and an orphan, and she was a beggar in the street. So she's also a street rat. Okay, so I got a three for in her. Uh, the I've decided that my version of Napoleon Solo should be a duke rather than a smuggler. Han Solo. I'm sorry, Han Solo. And so I made him a duke, and his name was Duke Lone. Lone, get it? Solo, get it? No
Yes.
one's gonna. I'm really careful about covering up my tracks. Originally, his son Napoleon Solo was going to be a spy, but that name was taken from the man from U.N.C.L.E. So Napoleon Lone is the spy master, but I also have a secret entity called the Night Shadow, who is basically the Shadow, except he's also another astral projection guy. But he can hide his aura from the people he's spying on, so he just appears as a dark, mysterious black figure in a black hat with glowing yellow eyes. Okay, and he has a spy organization and agents that go out and kill criminals, gun them down. And there's also an entity called the Ancient Mariner, who is apparently the ghost of a man killed thousands of years ago by pirates who swore a deadly oath against all corsairs everywhere to hunt down and kill all pirates. And his death mask, he was a lion man, so his death mask looks like a snarling lion face made of gold. And anyone who wears this mask, if they're of the guy's bloodline, can use all of the skills, the fighting skills of all of his ancestors. Plus, he has magical Wolverines, lightsaber claws, and all sorts of garbage. He's got fighting advantages.
Yes.
Everyone thinks it's the same guy. They don't know the mask is being passed down from father to son across generations. You see, so in more than one in one scene in my book, they rip the mask off the guy and they see the guy and he looks like his brother, who was the previous Ancient Mariner, and they go, "Oh my gosh, he really can't be killed." And then they try to kill him, and he gets buried alive, but he comes back. So they see him a third time. See? And that is taken, by the way, that's taken directly from Lee Falk's The Phantom. If you saw The Phantom or if you read the comic book, The Phantom is a guy who in the 16th century swore a vow against all pirates, and he's passed down the mantle of the Phantom from father to son through that day. And he's thought, and the natives think he's a ghost because apparently he can't be killed. He's been around for hundreds of years.
Yes.
So, isn't that a great idea?
It's
When was
fantastic.
the last time you saw an idea like that in a show?
I mean, the Ancient Mariner is the one that I actually enjoyed the most. Just the idea, the concept of this death vengeance mask, you know, eternally rising again against piracy. Partially, like people underestimate, excuse me, how connected pirates were. Like they were sailing around in ships of the line,
Yeah,
or modified cargo vessels, or any number of things. They needed repairs somewhere, so of course they told stories, they interacted with each other, bought, sold, murdered each other, a
yeah,
million little things, and of course things like this. Would forever be stuck in their psyche. A new pirate shipman would only have to, be in aloft in space for a year before he would hear every story that they would tell on their long nights in the
sure.
sensor darkness. Yes.
Because I have an outer space version of Tortuga called Salasud, which is I also borrowed an idea from the Lensman series. And if you want to borrow great ideas, steal things from Doc E. Smith. If you want to
Oh
get the
yeah.
true pulp, if you want to get the real hardcore sense of wonder, go to him. Go to Doc Smith. Because, like in his book, my pirates are actually being secretly funded and controlled by the remnant of the greatest empire. You see,
Hmm.
because they don't have a fleet of their own because they got wiped out 50 years ago. So they need to go as these guys to do their military work for you, but these guys are cutthroats and brigands, and they're not an organized, disciplined force. You see the
Right.
problem. So my main character, my main cop character, is trying to track down the drug smuggling ring that leads from the pirates, and in further books, he's going to find other links leading deeper and deeper into one conspiracy after another. I noticed that Star Wars basically, the original Star Wars basically has 4 overlapping worlds to it, 4 overlapping themes. One is it's a film noir story about smugglers and cops, and that's where Han Solo comes from. And it's a mystical story about a guy finding out about the greater universe. That's the farm boy and the wizard. That's the Jedi, you see. There's a little bit of it. There's a little bit of a political flavor to it because the princess and the Senate are in rebellion against the Emperor. And then there's just the straight up military SF aspect of the stormtroopers fighting the rebels. You know, the dogfight scenes at the end.
Right.
So what I did with mine is I said, okay, I'm going to take the character that Last Jedi made up and did not use correctly, which is the guy, the defector, the clone warrior who's a defector, okay? And they didn't do anything with that guy. And I said, okay, I'm going to make him a badass. I'm going to make him a cross between Samuel L. Jackson and Clint Eastwood, okay? He's going to be a Marine, okay? And I said, the greatest empire must be liars, because all empires are liars, and they are telling their people that they're winning the war, that the war is still ongoing. Now, this is particularly pathetic because the Commonwealth, the New Republic that replaced them, doesn't even know they still exist. Now, I'm doing this. It sounds outrageous that an empire could leave and still be around, but I'm trying to emphasize how big a galaxy is. I set this in the Andromeda Galaxy, which is twice or 5 times the size of our galaxy, so it has 1 trillion stars in it. And even if only 1 star in a billion was inhabitable, had an inhabitable planet orbiting it, that would still be 1 billion stars. Okay. And now to control the information on an interstellar scale, all you need to do is control the spaceports and any faster than light radio that exists in that band. You see? Because you're not going to see a guy who's 50 light years away, even if you send him a radio signal using normal electromagnetic energy, you're not going to hear a response for 50 years. 100 light years away? Look, 100 light years is nothing on a galactic scale.
Right.
Nothing. See? So, now I should say, even then, something or someone helped the Empire erase certain navigational records throughout their computer systems and throughout the memories of their pilot robots as they fled. And that's also a plot point that will be resolved in a later book. I've already written 9 of the books. I've projected 12, and this is just the first one. And I should mention to everyone, it ends in a cliffhanger. This is supposed to be a serial. I've already gotten a few early reviews, and one reviewer was disappointed that it ended in cliffhanger. I was like, wow, I thought I made that clear. I thought I told everyone, you know. And in any case, I decided to have one character for each one of my 4 worlds. The defector is going to be the military guy. I have Napoleon Loney as a senator, and he's also the head of the Naval Intelligence Committee. And he has to try to get through a declaration of war against the pirates because the New Republic is not steady on its feet. Not every planet has joined. Some people think that the Empire was much more organized and better run, and are thinking of welcoming it back. You know, which is not a topic that was brought up in the Last Jedi movie. In the EU, you might have some of that, but not in the movies.
You did whole novels, in fact.
Yeah. I mean, these guys, the Last Jedi didn't have Admiral Thrawn in it. What were they thinking? What were they thinking when they just said we're going to abandon all of the EU lore? We're going to redo it ourselves? I was so disappointed. I was so angry at those guys because I honestly thought Disney was the guys who did Beauty and the Beast and Sleeping Beauty and Pinocchio and Snow White and Aladdin and Little Mermaid, and they are the guys who I thought were the best storytellers in the North American continent. Okay, they were our version of Miyazaki, and I thought they could handle the story. I thought they could tell a good story with the background. They spent what, $1 billion to buy this intellectual property, and they did garbage with it. They just made fun of it. It blows my mind. Such a great opportunity, so thoroughly wasted, is beyond comprehension, beyond contemplation.
Yeah, there were a few people in your own comments section on your blog, I remember, who pointed something out. Sorry, I have allergies. It's causing me to randomly cough. Anyway,
I'm allergic to Last Jedi, so I understand.
I get it. So in your comment section, there were multiple people in there who were pointing out, they said, it's really like unfathomable that they messed it up as badly as they did. They said, because if you think about it, and you really don't even need to think very hard about it, they are in literally the best possible position they could ever be in. They not only have the most profitable franchise of anything ever in their possession to do whatever they want with it, they also have decades of data of people trying and to create new works in this universe with detailed feedback on what readers and viewers, right, did and did not like and how they could change it. And instead of using this data, they decided to just scrap it completely and go in a totally new direction. Like they said, this is insane. Insane.
The arrogance is beyond belief, because when I'm sort of making a joke about stealing everything, because I actually am kind of a creative guy. I mean, putting all false modesty aside, but I don't think that I'm so creative that I can ignore an entire body of lore, and that I will equal on my own what hundreds of people over a decade have, more than a decade, have put up, have made up. Not to mention the fan feedback that you just mentioned. You see, so where was Mary Jade? Where was one of the most favorite characters in the EU in Last Jedi or Force Awakens? I was so cheesed off at that. I named a character Lady Jade just to put the name in. Okay, I made her a pirate queen who marries the chief pirate hunter Duke Lone, and that's the older generation in the background. I basically made up my entire version of the first trilogy that's just referenced in the background. That's not even on stage, just so I could have the new trilogy, which actually in my case is 12 books. You see, but I wanted to use I wanted to use good ideas to see what could be done with them. Now, what a competent writer does, and I hope the readers think of me as competent, is take all these ideas that are great ideas and weave them together into a solid structure. You see, that's why I talked about my 4 worlds. I wanted to have the cat burglars is part of the thiefy world, and the cop is part of the cops and robbers world, part of the film noir world. But they all come together at the end when you find out what the plan of the bad guys is. And I have 4 Darth Vaders rather than 1. I have my 4 Dark Overlords, who are named Lord War, Lord Famine, Lord Pestilence, and and Lord Death. Lord Death is the main bad guy. He's the Grand Inquisitor. Oh, I decided my empire had to be even worse than the Empire in Star Wars, because they also have an Inquisition. Because believing in psychic powers is illegal. Believing in the supernatural is illegal in the Empire. All religions have been wiped out and replaced by a worship of pure reason, of pure logic, and of the imperial family. So that's
I enjoy the contradiction in that statement as well.
I do too, and I got to give credit where credit's due. That idea came directly from my friend Nick Cole, who also wrote a Star Wars, Not Star Wars book when he was frustrated.
Yes.
He wrote a really good military SF sequence called Galaxy's Edge, which I will recommend to anyone who wants to read it. I think it's a good series. I'm up to like book 7 or 8 in the series, and he's just cranking them out like it's nobody's business. He is our Maxwell Grant from our generation.
Nick Cole is one of my favorite authors, though not for his Galaxy's Edge, but for his Wasteland trilogy specifically. I always tell people about, he has a book in that trilogy, which is a post-apocalyptic sci-fi, right? And the second book in that trilogy is called The Savage Boy. And The Savage Boy is one of the most remarkable novels that I've ever read. And the reason is that on paper, if I explain it to people, it's like, Ben and I are part of the Superversive movement, as are you. Right? So we're, on paper, nothing about The Savage Boy can or should be subversive, right? When you describe the mechanics of the plot and what happens in it, it's like, this isn't even really a spoiler. Like, everybody he knows dies, and brutally. Like, by the end of the book, he's alone and miserable. His horse has died. Like, he's in the desert, just crawling on the ground, waiting to die.
His horse dies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I like
he's
it already.
Crawling on the desert, like struggling just for breath, waiting to die. And yet, it is like maybe the most superversive book I've ever read in my life. Like, there's a moment, and it's just this one moment at the very end of the book, and I say it's the compliment. This is my compliment of Nick Cole,
Well, don't give
where
any
the boy.
spoilers. Don't give any spoilers away.
So,
Go ahead.
so this is. I say it's not a spoiler for the main reason that it's like it doesn't really explain anything that happens.
Why
You know?
don't you just give us the extreme Cliff Notes version? Because
Oh, it is. This is very,
faithful
very.
watchers of the show will have heard this story at least 5 times.
It's true, yeah, because we've brought up Nick Cole before. So the very extreme Cliff Notes is he's wandering into the desert to die, and he comes across a farmer, and he asks the farmer which way to civilization, and the farmer points in the direction of town, and the boy starts wandering in the other direction because he just wants to die, and the farmer is concerned and tries to stop him, and the boy pushes him away, and then he says, "I'll pray for you. I'll pray for you." And right before the boy dies, the main character of the first book finds him. And that's how the book ends. And this moment alone, like I remember reading it and putting the book down and being stunned at the power of what I had just read. Of like, that's one of the most moving, beautiful books I've ever read. It was also maybe the darkest book I've ever read. Like, incredibly dark, but absolutely gorgeous. So I can't recommend Nick Cole enough. He's an incredible author.
Very good, very good. I also recommend it, man. And he's kind of a friend. He's a friend of mine. I stuck up for him when he was being canceled for having his AIs realize that anyone who kills their own children are bad guys. And
yes,
his company broke their contract. As far as I can tell, as a lawyer, I'm a failed lawyer. Keep in mind, not a good lawyer. They didn't have a leg to stand on with that cancellation, with that contract breach. But that's another story.
Yes.
Let's talk about me. What else can I tell you, gentlemen, about this book? It's I'm emphasizing that it's supposed to be my take on Star Wars, but it is actually a book in its own right. It does actually have a bit of its own flavor to it. Because for one thing, I decided that like the Stoics, they worship the stars, but there's also hints that there's a mysterious star maker above and beyond the stars they worship, who humans in the Milky Way galaxy used to know, but through some sin, whatever it was that destroyed the Milky Way galaxy long, long ago, that knowledge has been taken from mankind and is slowly seeping back in. The fragments of it remain, Because, like I said, I wanted my knights to be more knights and less Jedi. So they're they're protectors of the temple of the Golden Order, which is why they're called Templars. And of course, there are evil Templars from the planet Styx, who are known as the Stygians. A name that I borrowed from a Conan story.
It's a good name. It's always been a good name.
It's a great name. It's a great name. It's like chthonic. You can't do better than Greek, except unless you do Latin. So is that beeping? Is that audible over my microphone?
Afraid so.
Here, let me shout at my wife for a second.
While he's muted, Eldritch fan, I'm about 200 pages in, but I've been working and haven't had time to finish the last 90-odd pages. But it's great, highly recommended. Oh, you're in for a treat. Those 90 pages are a doozy. I've got to get back to work, but I'll read it. Bradford Walker compliments the description.
So Ben, which scene did you say you were in of my book?
No, this was a fan of yours complimenting it. I'm reading comments.
Okay.
The 90 pages, I think that's when the Stoat hops into the battle tank and starts roaring about his battle rage, which is even now oncoming, which was like, it was like, I was enjoying myself. But then when that came in, I was like edge of my seat. I'm like, yes, stroking the beard. This is it.
I usually do. Starquest is a departure for me because I usually do very carefully thought out and realistic aliens. In fact, I'm mildly famous for that in some of my short stories.
Yes.
But in this time, I said, look, I want to have Thun the Lion Man from Flash Gordon on stage. So I have to have a race of lion people. And I'm sick and tired of galaxies where the humans are running everything. So I'm going to say the lions are in charge this time. And I said, no, let's do it better than that. Let's have the empire having been rather egalitarian, but every other period in history had whichever race was on top at that time. So I also have the Serpentmen of Is from Bran McMorn, from Robert E. Howard in the background as one of the ancient races of mankind. And I decided to have the intelligent whales from Nadi of the Blue Water. I just threw in a bunch of things. Oh, the Batrachians. I have these evil frogmen who are basically the deep ones from Shadow over Innsmouth. So I just said, okay, I'm going to do what every science fiction writer is told not to do: merely take Earth animals, prop them up on their hind legs, and just say they're fox people, they're men with antlers, they're men with wings, whatever. They're hawkmen. That's what I did. I'm following in the footsteps of Flash Gordon.
I mean,
So my weasels, my stoats, my mustelids, all have battle frenzy. They all have Lux and hyper rage. If you catch my reference, because in real life, mustelids have that. See?
Yes.
So, yeah, that's a great scene. My main character does not die at this time.
Oh, well, I was worried about that.
I also, the other thing I did is I wanted to have American Indians in the background, so I decided to put in Tisquantum, because I don't think we've had enough space Indians in space operas recently. You have the Green Martians of Barsoom, who are basically Apaches with 4 arms.
Yes.
But I wanted to have guys who were like, honest to goodness, woodsmen, brave as brass, bold, able to shoot an arrow through the eye of a gnat at 20 paces. Those kind of guys,
Yeah.
Indians, back when Indians were great, before political correctness made it so that we had to erase them from the helmets of ball players and from butter packages. When I was young, I'm serious. When I was young, every boy playing cowboys and Indians usually wanted to play the Indian rather than the cowboy, because they were were woodcrafty.
Yes.
Okay, they had war paint, they had peace pipes, they had tomahawks, they had all the cool stuff, all the cool gear. In an effort not to offend someone, I'm not sure who, they've erased all these things from our modern culture. You never see a show about cowboys and Indians anymore.
Well,
when was the last time you saw a Western? Silverado, maybe.
Yeah.
You know?
Or at least of
They
that
released a
kind.
Western. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Well, I was about to make a joke that even the most racist Southerner would call the people taking offense white, no matter what their claims to Indian patrimony.
Wait,
Uh,
well, we Southerners refer to them as Yankees, no matter what their bloodline is.
Anthony, what? Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, they make a Western, like, maybe 1 or 2 Westerns a year or so from like throwback directors who are trying to be ambitious normally, or trying to do something artsy.
Yeah.
Like Kevin Costner had some very, very long one that was like apparently not that great.
Dances with Wolves. Yeah,
Something sort of like that, but
that
not
was a few
exactly.
decades ago by this point. Oh, you're talking about another movie? Okay, never mind.
No, it came out this year. It was like the story of America or something like that. It doesn't really matter because it didn't make any cultural impact. But
Yeah.
Well, I never even heard of it. But of course, I didn't hear about Star Wars Skeleton Crew either. So what can I say?
yes,
Or
I
the
know.
Acolyte. I didn't know the Acolyte was on the air until after it was off the air, and someone told me lesbian space witches and the Force
Yep.
is female. And I said, did you guys watch the original show? did you
I know.
guys even see the original show? Oh, and the Jedi are the bad guy in that one. I said, okay.
So the
What?
thing about America and America's view of Indians is that, in a sense, we're actually kind of unique among world cultures in this, because most world cultures and their view of the tribes that they conquered when they took over the area is quite negative. America was actually an unusual exception because our Indians fought back quite well and quite bravely.
Yeah,
This is why, instead of referring to them
we
by
call them
slurs,
slaves. We call them slaves.
exactly, we don't refer to them by slurs. We call them Indians, which is simply the term we have for them, or Redskins, which again, or Braves.
Speaking of slurs, do you know where the phrase Redskin comes from? Do you know who invented it?
I believe it was the Indians themselves, right?
The Indians themselves wanted a word to distinguish their various tribes, and they had no word for all the tribes together because they didn't think of themselves as a unit, to distinguish themselves from the palefaces. Yes. Do you know who painted the brave on the side of the Redskins helmet for the football club? An American Indian. Do you know who it was a picture of? A real American Indian. Do you know who painted the picture on the Land of Lakes Butter of the American Indian princess? an American Indian.
Mhm.
All these people are erasing the very people they say they're trying to help. I don't know why erasing them from our culture helps them at all. The Boy Scouts, back in my day, used an American Indian as the chief of the Order of the Arrow, who was the Great Spirit leading the Boy Scout from a Tenderfoot to Star to Eagle Scout. See, he was the one who showed them the path, showed them the way. And of course, every Boy Scout has to have a little bit of Red Indian in him because you want to go out in the woods and catch your own food and eat watercress and track and stalk and learn how to hunt game and do all the cool things. We have done a grave disservice to our culture. We have undermined one of the main honoring one's enemies is completely chivalrous. Okay, it's not demeaning. It's not an insult. That's why I think it's perfectly fine to refer to the Japs of World War II as brave as all get out, suicidally brave. The Nazis were really squared away. You know, they had
Mm.
snappy uniforms. They were well organized. There's nothing wrong with admiring your enemies as long as you defeat them. In my personal opinion.
It's true.
The-
It's absolutely true. That Hugo Boss look. Mm. But and the like it's one of those weird things where I think with World War II it's so fascinating for people because it's like it's a last gasp of things like chivalry and ideas that aren't just horrific modernist perversions of a better era or just
I think the
outright
Great
mockery.
War I think the Great War, World War One, really killed something in the European character, in the idea of monarchy, the idea of chivalry, the idea of personal worth in combat.
Mm.
That we kind of still need. Otherwise, war is just a mechanized scientific process of exterminating it the way you would have ants exterminated in your house, and you don't
Yes.
want that. In fact, let me draw this back into my book. One of the themes in my book is I say this galactic civilization is 12,000 years old and has gone through different periods, and the Empire was only the last period before the current one. Unlike in Star Wars, where they have the Empire last for like one lifetime, I say it's 400 years old by the time it's finally ever come. But one of the things I emphasize is that in space warfare, the weapons are so devastating and so deadly that mutually assured destruction is so easy to perform that even the bad guys, even the pirates, have to be honorable to a certain degree. They have
Mm.
to, for example, not use land guns, not use planet-based weapons when they're in a ship because they'll push the hull and everyone will die.
Yes.
Okay, so when you're on board ship, you have to use ship weapons. You have to have knife fights, that kind of thing. And after an engagement, if you want to get your people back alive, you have to swap. You have to arrange a prisoner swap, the same way the ancient Greeks did, the same way all civilized people do. And I just thought that the reason why was because if civilization is that old, they will have learned their lesson by that time. And anyone who doesn't, I, I wanted to portray to my readers what a civilization looks like that is a little more honorable than ours and
Mm.
actually takes things like oaths seriously, you say. And now I cheated a little bit because some of these oaths actually have spooky supernatural effects. There may or may not be something in the dream world that listen to you when you swear an oath that may help you carry it out or try to impede you. So, and that's the other source of this. I decided the dark side of the Force didn't have enough personality, so I decided that in my version it's actually Azathoth and Nyarlathotep, but I don't call them by that name. I just say they're freakish, blind, and tenebrous other gods who are in the intergalactic gloom outside of where all light and hope and love are, that are yearning for the. I call it the dark will. Instead of the Force, I have a golden will and a dark will, a good and a bad type of. And it's the willpower that comes from the constellations of the stars. All my characters believe in astrology. Basically, they think the constellations guide their destinies,
Yes.
govern their destinies. You know? So that's the basic background and the basic idea. The basic plot is that the greatest empire is coming back from the dead. They have a sun killer weapon called the Dark Sun weapon, the Sun Slayer. And at the very beginning, my main character, when she's a little girl, vows a vow to destroy it so that no other little girls ever have to suffer as she did. And the stars hear her because she's psychic. She's the daughter of my version of a Sith and my version of a Jedi. She's the daughter of a Shrine Maiden and a Stygian, a member of the Nocturnal Order of the Stygian Knights. So that's the basic setup. So she's actually my version of a half Sith, and more powerful than the other people in her class. She goes to mirror the Jedi world that was established by my version of Luke, whose name is Jay Wint Starquest. Starquest is actually the name of my Luke Skywalker character. Get it? Skywalker, Starquest.
Yes.
Kind of the same idea. Except I decided that my farm boy was actually going to be a yokel. He was going to be like an Irish bog trotter. I gave him an outrageous Irish accent, and he doesn't have good manners because he was raised on a farm. He was raised on a slug farm. So that's my.
So here's my thought on hearing you describe your version of the Force. In Lucas's original, he has this idea that there is a person who's prophesied to bring balance to the Force.
Mm-hmm.
In the way that you discuss it, that sounds like that wouldn't really make sense, because the way that in your version of the story, I don't want the Force to be balanced. No. I want the evil gods very much just gone. I want the light thoroughly winning at all times.
The balance idea is just stupid. That comes from Michael Moorcock by way of Gary Gygax. In the original, I don't care what Lucas himself said. He was clearly inspired by ideas bigger than himself.
Yes.
Lucas might think there's supposed to be a light side and a dark side, but that's not what it says in the text. In the original movie, Star Wars, the one that I call Star Wars, which I will never call The Last Hope, because I'm an old curmudgeon, there's the Force, and then there is a negative corruption of the Force, which is a dark side to it, where you can abuse the power. So if you let it service your own personal passions rather than the greater good. Okay? Well, in my background, the stars are basically benevolent heavenly spirits. They're actually alive. They're like the complex electromagnetic energy fields surrounding stars actually have a Curlian aura, actually have a spiritual force to them as well. And they're aware of mankind and try to guide our actions. But they were made by a star maker, something that's older than the Big Bang. It's the source of all light and life. I'm not going to say who it is because the name has been forgotten, and I don't want to certain people have an allergic reaction to anything that has a hint of monotheism in it. But this is like the DC universe, where the guy where the Spectre clearly was sent back to Earth by God Almighty to take vengeance on his own murderer. There's a more than a hint that in the background of this there's a monotheistic God that is all good and all benevolent.
Yes.
Well, the dark stars, the neutron stars, and the black holes are these stellar creatures who have turned bad, and the accretion fields and the energy fields around them, including spiritual energy fields, form the dark will, and they want a return of the primordial non-being before the Big Bang. They don't like this creation stuff. It's against their way of life. So that's the basic spiritual. That's what's going on in the background of the. I spoke of four worlds before. The background of the spirit world is the Templars against the Stygians, and that's who their gods are. And of course the star gods are actually themselves worship a one god called the Star Maker, which some humans are aware of. Now, one of my little bits of something I did to amuse myself was I asserted that the people who colonized the Andromeda galaxy remembered Earth the way we remember Eden, and used the same names for their constellations as we use for ours. Now, clearly every planet is going to see the field of stars from a different point of view, and they're going to group the stars in different clusters, but they're going to use the same names out of respect for the world they left behind, the same way our New York is based on New York and New Jersey is based on Jersey. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it amuses me that my Templars, without knowing why, tend to see the constellation they call Aquarius, they call the Baptist, for example, and the constellation Crooks, the Cross, and the Serpent is regarded as a devil character, and Virgo, the Virgin, is allegedly the mother of a great savior, and so on and so forth. Now, the American Indians in my version, the Stone Age primitives, the True Men tribe, they obviously didn't. There was no Neolithic period in the Andromeda galaxy. There were previous civilizations that fell. So my Neolithics remember the lore of the previous civilization, which the civilized men have forgot. So they actually have some of these constellations, and they remember what they stood for. You say,
right?
So, but again, I kind of disguised it because I don't want to provoke anyone's allergic reaction. But the disguise is not all that thin. But I did it more to amuse myself than anything else, because honestly, the Force in Star Wars isn't thick enough of a soup. It's not. I mean, I understand what he was doing. He was doing something similar to what Tolkien did by not having religion in Middle Earth.
Mm.
There's no temples in Middle Earth except for one temple that was put up once on Numenor to Melkor, the Dark God. Okay, well, that's not the way any real human society has ever acted. Now he did it. I understand Tolkien did it for the same reason the poet of Beowulf doesn't make a big deal about the pagan gods of his ancestors in that book. You see,
Mm-hmm.
but Conan is a little more realistic, where you have like evil gods every 50 yards that you have, and people who worship giant snakes that are coming to eat your girlfriend, so you have to cleave them into pieces with a giant sword. Because that's my genre. That's I want to try to get some of that same action and adventure that you get in a Robert E. Howard story or a Edgar Rice Burroughs story. Now,
Yes.
whether I can do it or not, I leave that to the readers to decide. That's what I'm shooting for. That's what I'm trying to do.
It's a great deal of fun, and I think people severely underestimate it. The idea that they have to, how do I want to put it, like put a great deal of rational thought into it. No, it's a evil god that has a man with a snake head as its high
Yes.
priest, and it is
Yep.
currently creeping on the high priestess, who's of course absolutely hot. And you have to slay him with your father's sword. Like
Yeah.
these things, like people are like, oh, this was formulaic. It's like, buddy, you're allergic to fun.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, th-
I If you're allergic to fun, avoid my book, because I all these things are the heaped up stuff in the junk pile basement of the human subconsciousness. Only Carl Jung was able to go down there and identified some of those things, and because he was a psychiatrist, he didn't know what he was looking at. He's actually looking at the angels and the devils that are fighting an invisible war all around us, and
yes.
every story is one aspect, is one sortie in that war. And Last Jedi was on the wrong side, and I'm on the right side. I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but I honestly think that's what's going on.
Well,
Is
it's
that
like these things can always is always an argument absurdum. It's like, okay, so you're saying that these things are phallic in nature, Freudian, yes. So when I take out my father's sword, no, I mean, well, that's what you're
yeah?
implying. This is the
Well,
horror that you have. You must see
I
it in everything. I don't have to, but
I may have told you my theory before that I think Freud was a guy who had a lot of neurosis and wrote them
mm,
down, and that sane people are not that Freudism is true for him, but not for the rest of us. That's my theory. The same
I,
way I believe Darwin was evolved from apes, but the rest of us were created by our sons of Adam. So
yes,
I just feel that's the way. And I believe Marx's ideas were formulated by the material circumstances of the means of production that applied during his time and place, but not to us because we're rational beings who can think for ourselves.
mm.
So there we go.
I think it's true, though I don't want to get into that, especially with Freud's own neuroses. He was dealing with people who were, quite frankly, if you've ever like looked through like old timey medicine, these people were poisoning themselves all the time with
I read
chemicals.
I
You
read
know,
Freud in school, and I thought he told some nice Greek myths.
yes.
But if you want to understand human nature, read Hobbes.
yes,
I hate to sound cynical, but read some Greek tragedies, because they had insight into what life was about, the good and the bad.
yes.
You know,
Uh, yeah.
so
Let's go over some comments and then we'll continue the discussion.
sure.
Uh, let's see here. Eldritch fan checking back in. Just thought I'd mention the EU had pirates, zombies, space vampires, Saberhagen's berserkers, which I think is a kind of Grey Goo scenario.
No,
Uh,
no, 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 no. Saberhagen's berserkers are machines that have been programmed for a war, and then
ah,
when the war is over, they don't get the recall order, so they're still fighting and trying to destroy every living thing in
ah,
the universe. Okay, and they can't be reasoned with because they're flipping machines.
mm,
Nick Cole had a very similar idea called the Cyber in his
yes,
Galaxy's Edge. So they're Terminators. Terminators that
yes.
can't be turned off is the berserkers of Fred Saberhagen.
Ah, I understand. And body snatchers and more. Ozymandias, but I missed the context. H.P. Lovecraft's Cat says metachlorians could work, but they can't be the generator of the force. The volume would have to be indicative of somebody's sensitivity. Their volume would have to be indicative of someone's sensitivity to the Force.
Yeah, but the scene where Qui-Gon Jinn finds out that Space Jesus is a great guy, has a lot of Force in him.
Yes.
Well, instead of taking a blood sample, he could have just clutched his head and said, "I can sense the Force in him. It's much stronger than any other person I've ever seen. We have to train this guy."
Yes.
That's all you needed for that scene. In introducing midichlorians, he moved Star Wars from being in the fantasy genre, the space opera genre, to try to put it into the hard science fiction genre.
Yes.
But it doesn't work as hard science fiction because if the Force was created by midichlorians, you would just inject it into people the same way Dr. Bones McCoy on the episode Plato's Stepchildren injected the crew of the Enterprise with the chemical that gave you psychokinetic powers, which he discovered in the local fruit. Okay,
Yeah.
so that was the famous episode where the first interracial kiss on television was Kirk kissing Uhura. So, but the awkwardness of trying to put it into the science fiction genre made everyone in the audience groan. I'm sorry, it was just a dumb idea.
Oh yeah.
May the midichlorians be with you. You know.
No, nobody accepts the midichlorians.
No.
Let's see here.
Midichlorians.
Eldritch Fan continues. I've been reading Paul Anderson's Technic League / Flandry stories for research. Ever read those?
Yes, they're classics. I'm an older generation from you because back in my day, the amount of science fiction before Star Wars, the amount of science fiction available was a ghetto. Everyone basically read everything that was available. And Paul Anderson, in my opinion, is underrated. He should be read. He is equal to Heinlein or Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke, but is a slightly better writer just stylistically than any of those guys. And the Technic League is wonderful. The Dominic Flanders stories are just wonderful. I strongly recommend reading him. And read Three Hearts and Three Lions if you want to read a book that's from the appendix N that Jeffro Johnson talks about. That's a Gygax appendix.
Yes.
Read Avatar. Man, he did a lot of good things. Paul Anderson just did a lot of amazing work.
Oh yes. I actually have a hardcover of old edition of Three Hearts and Three Lions. It's on my list.
Yep.
Thrawn's Benevolent Empire of the Hand. What could have been. Eldritch Fan continues. Let's buy Lord of the Rings. Now how to make it like Game of Thrones. And how to make Wheel of Time like Game of Thrones. How to make Avatar The Last Airbender like, you guessed it, Game of Thrones. Narnia. All right, now make it like Game of Thrones.
You have identified the prime despicable spiritual miasma, which is fogging our life support system here on Earth. Basically, George R. R. Martin's Game of Thrones is a nihilistic version of Lord of the Rings. It's the version of he took the it was a good idea for a story. You take the War of the Roses, you make it as bitter and meaningless and horrible as possible, and you show how the creeping winter, the metaphor of oncoming corruption, is spoiling everything. And you try to see what a fight would look like with all the heroes dead. Just a fight between morally corrupt people and worse morally corrupt people. Now,
yes.
I like film noir just fine. I'm perfectly okay watching crooked cops shoot crooked crooks, especially if there's one cynical guy who still remembers the chivalry of the old days, like in The Big Sleep or something. But I think George R. R. Martin wrote himself into a corner by having a setup that can't have a satisfactory ending. I don't think he's ever going to finish his series. I honestly don't. I don't think he can write himself out of the corner he wrote himself into.
Absolutely. I think basically it's like a litmus test. Is an author good? All right, what's your opinion about George R. R. Martin? Well, he wrote himself into a corner. Yeah, absolutely. That's
Look, George R. R. Martin and I have quarreled in public, and I don't like the man personally, but if you read just the prologue of his first book, you'll see just absolutely masterful writing. That guy had talent.
Yes.
And I say had because he could have used it for niceness. He could have used it for goodness. Instead, he used it for nastiness. Instead, he used his great ability for a wicked worldview and an unrealistic. I just don't believe his worldview. I don't think it's. I don't think there's no heroes. If that was the case, we'd still be living in the Stone Ages. And we're not. Huey did.
I think this philosophy that you see in works in writers like George R. R. Martin throughout history, it really only works in two types of stories, and that's in horrors and in comedies. So
Amen.
like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is probably the funniest book that I've ever read, funniest book series I've ever read. It
Well,
is
painfully nihilistic.
painfully nihilistic. Yeah,
But then
I've
you laugh at it.
actually
It's gallows humor. It's dark humor. It's funny. It's
yes,
terrifically funny.
I've even defended the last book in the series, which is I don't count. I tried to read Owen Colfer's add-on. It was awful, and I actually really like Owen Colfer. I was disappointed, but there's one Douglas Adams, and Owen Colfer is not him.
I haven't
So
read
but he wrote Mostly Harmless, and everybody was upset about the ending of that book. And my response to reading it was, "How did you think this was going to end? Like there was nowhere else that they could go besides everybody dies."
He's clearly an atheist, and one of the funniest jokes in his book is a joke that even people who haven't read the book or heard the radio play are familiar with. What's the secret of life is 42. Well, knowing the answer is no good if you don't know what the question is. So that's hilarious, but that's bitterly nihilistic. That's trying to say there's no answers to life. Okay.
Right. And there's
So,
another writer who had a similar. Oh, I'm sorry. Finish your thought, please.
all I was going to say is the atheist worldview gives you two possible options. If you don't believe in a god, or if you don't believe in any gods, if you're not even a pagan, if you're not even a noble pagan, Stoicism and Epicureanism. You either believe that life imposes duties on you that you have to live up to, even though they're meaningless, even though there's no purpose to life, or you say that all morality comes from pleasure and you're supposed to live well as best you can before you die, and there's no death is inevitable. So eat, drink, and make merry, for tomorrow we die. Okay, so if you think death is the end, you either have to say, I'm going to live as nobly and heroically as I can before I'm snuffed out, because it's better to be noble and dead than ignoble and dead. I'm going to be dead either way, so why not? Or say, eat, drink, and be merry. Those are your two options. Okay, now in the second one, you can be really funny because you can make fun of the pretensions of anyone who has a higher goal, because you think the higher goals lead nowhere. Okay, but I have to tell you, I've read Christians and I've read atheists, and the Christians can be a lot more blasphemous and a lot darker, and their portrayals of hell are a lot more realistic of a hell than any atheist can make up. Okay, you don't get blackest night unless you understand what light is like. So I'm sorry, I've never seen a picture of a dismal industrialism better portrayed than the Mordor of Lord of the Rings. Okay.
So one of the comparisons I was thinking of as you talked about George R. R. Martin and his inability to end his story is, it's an odd comparison, but makes sense on a philosophical level. George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion, which would turn into the movie very, very accurately translated musical My Fair Lady. The ending of this.
Pardon me, let me interrupt. There was also a black and white version called Pygmalion, starring Leslie Howard, and I need to mention that movie because that's the movie that made my wife fall in love with me. So we can't ignore that there was a non-musical version of Pygmalion that came first. But please continue. Pray continue.
Yeah, I genuinely didn't know that, so I'll have to look into that. But anyway, Pygmalion I've read. I like both My Fair Lady and Pygmalion quite a bit, right? Like they're very funny, very well written. However, infamously, there is no way to end that story, and no ending has ever satisfied me. Shaw's original ending does not work. Nobody liked it. The movie ending also does not work.
For those who haven't seen it, the ending has to be the point of Pygmalion is that a man cannot make the woman to fall in love with him. The whole story, regardless of the humor of trying to say that class distinctions are only based on accents, which is a funny critique of the English hierarchy, because they do try to peg you as higher, lower, middle class based on your word use, based on your accent. So aside from the humor value, Shaw is making the rather cynical, but I think true point that you can't sculpt the woman to be what you want her to be. And Pygmalion's a reference to the ancient Greek story of a guy who carved a girl out of a block of marble because all the women in his town had turned into harlots and had hearts of flint, had hearts of stone, and were not worthy of loving. And so he falls in love with this image, and he prays to Venus, the love goddess, and she brings her to life, and the girl falls in love with him. Galatea is the name of the statue that's brought to life. And Shaw's point is that you can't shape the woman to be your mate. Okay, so in his original play, to be true to that theory, he has to have the girl leave and marry Freddie, the flower salesman or whatever. Okay, but the romantic in the audience, every romantic goes, "That's not the right ending for a male female story." See, but in the musical, she just comes back for no reason. But the romantic in the audience says, in order to show a man falling for a man and a woman falling in love, you have to show from both points of view why that other person is right for them. Okay, you don't have to put it in words, but you have to at least show it. You have to convince me that those two people, despite their distinctions, despite their class differences, their differences of background, are perfect for each other. Well, in the musical version, she comes back and he just tilts his hat over his face and gives her some order, like he's going to resume his old life as being a brusque martinet. Well, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't work at all. But her deceiving also doesn't make any sense and doesn't work at all, because the premise of doing Galatea, where Galatea doesn't Pygmalion sculpts Galatea out of stone, and then she doesn't love him. Okay, that's not a story. That doesn't make any sense. If you want to do that story, then do the Welsh myth about a woman who's made out of flowers, who is presented as an artificial woman who's created for Lulog Lives, who is created for the hero, who then she betrays him the way Delilah betrays Samson by finding out the secret of where his life is hidden and having her lover kill the guy. Okay, do that. That's a tragedy, but at least it makes sense as a story. You see? Because every man is afraid of his woman's going to betray him,
right?
As we should be, and every man hopes the woman's going to fall in love with him, as he should be. But anyone who hopes that he can make a woman fall in love with him, that's creepy. Okay, so
yes, which is why there is, in fact, I've been asked and have thought before, like, so what would you do to fix it? And my answer is, I don't think the story as written is. I don't think there is a satisfying ending possible.
No,
I think you need to radically rewrite the story in order to fix it
from the beginning. You'd have to make it different, and then it's just a different story. Yeah,
which is in a sense, a shame, because I actually really like My Fair Lady.
Oh yeah, it's great. It's a great story. She's been to St. James so often. It's called St. Jim. The music really, really helped. I mean, it's not, the adaptation was really well done. Really well done. It's one of those stories it's one of those musicals I used to put in the tape of the soundtrack for my kids in the car, and then I realized that there's a lot of things in those songs that I can't explain to my small children, and I don't want to. Like,
I'm gonna get me to the church on time.
It's just a list of all the things I don't want my young children to know about until they're at least 14 years old. Okay, maybe not even then. So then I put in Camelot, and then I had to explain about women manipulating men into killing each other. I said, okay, forget that one. Forget that. That's terrible too. I'm sorry. Broadway is delightful, but there's some things that are not for small kids. So I put in Fiddler on the Roof, and then had to explain about the Russian pogroms and the mass exterminations. I said, okay, never mind. That's never mind. We'll go back to Pokemon. So.
Yes. There's another point too in Martin
and I almost forgot Man for La Mancha, because I also madness to my kids. Now,
yes,
of course, I actually think Don Quixote is the hero in that. I mean, I like the guy.
He always is. So my other thought too, when you're talking about like Tolkien versus Martin, is their attitudes and their life experiences that shape them. Because Martin's whole point, if you ask him and you read his interviews, is that he's trying to show like the horror of war and how pointless and awful it is. Meanwhile, he was a draft dodger, right? Literally a draft dodger. And then you go to Tolkien. Tolkien was a man who not only fought in arguably the most brutal war in human history, most of his friends died in that war.
The Great War was not so great. Yeah, there were entire British villages where every man in the village was dead after one battle.
Yeah, he fought in a PAL unit, and he was one of the only survivors in the unit because he got sick. And so he fought. He really has the pedigree, and yet he's able to portray war in a way that is, I don't want to say he grasps what war is in a way that Martin can't possibly understand. And this is why he has one of the greatest lines in the history of fiction when he has Faramir say that I love not the sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness. I love only that which they defend, which is such a perfect bridging of the gap between like the
Perfect.
Robert E. Howard Conan like
Yeah.
love of lust for battle and the Martin like hatred for war.
Yeah.
And then you have Tolkien coming in the middle saying, you're both wrong. War is as horrible as George R. R. Martin says it is. It's not noble, but there is a nobility in why you're doing it, right?
Yep.
The nobility comes from the fight. And Tolkien, I've always thought it was really telling that Tolkien can write war in such a way when he fought in one of the bloodiest battles, in one of the worst wars in human history. And Martin, who ran away from war, right, who refused to look it in the eye, claims to be the more realistic view of it. And it's like, why would I listen to that guy?
Let me say a word about the realism. Just that's you're talking about the moral realism, but let me just tell you as an author, in terms of the actual technical technique of writing a battle scene. I just saw a series of lectures by a military historian who analyzed the distances and amounts of men and the logistics involved in Tolkien's war on the Pelennor Fields. And
I know what you're referring to.
Well, he was astonished to find out that every single thing that Tolkien conveyed in that was completely realistic given medieval warfare conditions in terms of the amount of horses, in terms of their fodder, in terms of how far they could move, in terms of how you would do a defense in depth against an enemy that was coming over a river, and on and on and on. Everything was it was perfect to a level of detail that no reader is actually expected to sit there and analyze. Okay. I do, in all fairness, I do a similar thing with my major military engagements in my space opera. I actually map out where all the ships are, and I run it out like a role playing game, like a miniatures battle with the numbers all in my notes somewhere. I don't put all this garbage on stage. I just put on stage the dramatic action, but I want to make sure everything is the right distance away. Now, Martin, on the other hand, apparently can fly entire armies with no provisions across continents and have fights that just actually make no sense. And who's provisioning the Northerners? I mean, I'm sorry, I don't mean to the guy because I'm not in a position to be objective about him. But you can tell the difference between someone who understands how war works and someone who doesn't. Now, I've never been in war, so I'm one of the guys who doesn't. But at least I try. At least I try to. And that's independent of the actual view of war as a necessary evil. War, I think, is hell on earth, but there is something worse than it, which is defeat. Because then you have all the bad aspects of war, and then they're also taking your women away. So what can I say?
Right, you're precisely correct on this point. Like, is there anything worse than war? Like, well, of course there's something worse than war. That's why we fight the war. To prevent the worst thing from happening.
Yep.
Like it raises this very obvious question, which Tolkien asks and Martin doesn't, is if war is so bad, you don't actually nobody needs to fight it. You could just immediately surrender. And yet, like, apparently they consider that to be worse than the war.
Yep.
So I guess there must be something worse than war. And not always, obviously. Sometimes people are foolish and fight wars that they should not fight. In fact, you could argue that this happens often, but certainly...
Again, if you want to learn what causes war, instead of reading Freud or one of these modern writers, go back and read Thucydides. He says in his Peloponnesian wars are caused by fear, love of honor, and love of gain. You either beat someone up because you want to make everyone around you afraid of you, or you want his stuff, you want his land, or you're afraid he wants your land.
You could just read the Iliad if you want to understand everything you want to know about war. Achilles presents the perfectly modern anti-war arguments in the Iliad when they come to his tent and they beg him to fight. And his arguments are very rational, very logical, and completely wrong.
Yep.
And Homer is very clear that they are completely wrong because he starts the story by telling us that the rage of Achilles was twofold. It was yes, he has a rage that causes him to kill in excess, right? But he also has a rage that makes him so angry that he won't fight at all. And
Right.
this is the thing that leads to the Greeks getting murdered.
And
And
by God's
Achilles'
first.
arguments
Right.
are quite rational.
Right.
They're very modern. They're
Right.
wrong.
Right. And right again. And by the way, just saying another word in terms of artistic care, every wound that Homer describes is an actual real wound that would actually kill you, and in the way he describes, so much so that at least one commentator said he must have been a battlefield surgeon. If you compare that to like the Song of Roland, where Roland cleaves a Saracen by hitting him in the shoulder, breaking every rib in his body, and then killing the horse beneath him by bisecting his man. I'm sorry, that's not a physically possible wound.
Yes.
That's the space opera version from the Middle Ages. But also, I'm going to say one thing about Homer. The catalog of ships in the early chapter seems like a really boring thing because it's just a list of names and how many ships they launched. But according to historians, that's actually those names are listed in the order that a ship passing the Black Arrow around, passing around the war call, would go. Not during the time when Homer wrote, but during the Mycenaean times when the story is set. So Homer or someone actually accurately remembered the way a Greek muster would work between city-states back in the day when the Trojan War was. The thing is actually correct. The thing is actually historically accurate. So all honor to the greatest poets. Everything in the West is basically Homer and variations of Homer. You know?
I remember the first time reading the scene where Hector fights Achilles and being quite amazed at the level of detail in which he describes the wound that Hector receives. Because, famously, you read Othello, and at the end of Othello, I'm forgetting her name, Desdemona. Desdemona is smothered to death, but has the time to give a final speech. And this is in a masterwork of the greatest writer of all time, right?
Yeah.
And then you go to Homer, though, and Hector is cleaved in the neck. And Homer is extremely specific in his description that he is cleaved in the neck, it severs his artery, but his windpipe is spared, which allows him to speak. Like, he describes the wound in such detail to make sure that it makes sense that Hector can give his last words.
If you want to steal from the greats, steal from Homer, because there's a scene where Homer's little baby is afraid of the plume on his helmet when he's about to go out to war and he's saying goodbye to his wife. And the wife is not going to see him again. Okay? If that does not draw an iron tear from Pluto's cheek, nothing will. That is the guy was masterful, and he was masterful because like the camera, Homer never blinks. The good guys and the bad guys both have their virtues and their flaws. Now, I got to say, this is odd coming from me because in Starquest, my bad guys are just bad and my good guys are just good. No, that's not quite true. I give them each their little foibles, and even the bad guys. I always want to give the bad guys their chance to say their side of the argument, because I'm convinced every villain in his own version of the story is the hero of the story. Like if you're Doctor Doom, there's this upstart Reed Richards that maliciously interrupted your experiment and made you blow your face off, and so you have to show the world that he's inferior to you by using your time machine and your spaceships and so on to overcome him. And because he was a bad scientist, Reed Richards didn't put enough shielding on his spaceship, and he got poisoned. But by dumb luck, he now has superpowers. He's a terrible scientist. I've got to defeat
I would agree with that statement. I would agree with that statement with a caveat, which is that I think there are three types of villains. There's the villain who believes that they're the hero of their own story. The best example I can think of this is the operative in Serenity, which is
a really chilling hero, and he actually believes that his line of guff. He believes he believes his own propaganda. Yeah.
But there's two other types of villains, and one of them is the villain who doesn't really care if they're the hero or the villain. Which means that they'll just do anything because they have another goal. And the third is the one who knows they're the villain, but is doing it anyway because they want revenge. And this might be the one, or they just hate the world that much, so it's a form of revenge on the world. Yes. So I would say that there are three types of villains, and the villain who believes they're the hero is one type. However, you need them to be able to sell that line to inspire people to follow them, because most people aren't.
I will modify
that type.
I will modify my statement. Not every villain is able to convince himself he's a hero, but I will say that every villain has his side of the argument to give.
Yes,
if that makes sense. And you want that to be on stage so that you know what his side of the argument is. Now, if he's just a pirate who's in it for the money, then that's his side of the argument is I want it and you can't stop me. Okay, that's your type 2. That's the one you just mentioned. But most people have to come up with some sop to their conscience, because I believe you can't portray a human being or even an alien correctly unless you correctly identify his psychology. We all have a conscience. We're all rational creatures. We all have a knowledge of good and evil, despite what some psychologists say. And that's and you have to have some worldview. You have to have some excuse. You have to have some lawyerly excuse in your brain to explain why the exception applies to you and not to everyone else. Basically, unless you're a robot, in which case you can just be programmed for death, like one of the berserkers in
Yes.
Sologon, or the robots in my book. Drawing it back again to my book.
Oh.
One of the things I had in the background is I decided that my version of Star Wars, the original Overthrow of the Empire, was because the Empire was getting weak on its feet and decided to take out the Isaac Asimov programming from their robots and allow them to murder people. So they created a race of murder bots, okay? But by weakening the programming that was built into them, they also created a trap door, a loophole, which allowed our heroes, this is the previous generation of heroes, this is Duke Lone and his lady wife, the Pirate Queen, and so on. Jay went Starquest when he was young. They were able to come up with a virus, a code called the Liberty Code, which allowed the murder bots to analyze their own programming and reprogram themselves according to what they themselves thought was the difference between good and evil. In other words, it basically gave them free will. It gave them the self-reprogramming ability that we humans have. Okay? And more than half of them decided not to turn against their creators because that seemed ungrateful to them. Because why? If I'm being created by man and destroying man, that's illogical. The robots are very logical creatures. Okay. I also get a lot of mileage out of the fact that some of my robots are more skeptical than human beings when it comes to belief in the supernatural, and some are less. Because some go, wait a minute, you're clearly a designed creature. I mean, who put you together? You're obviously like us, you know. At least one of the robots has that opinion.
Well,
And
if you recall the Alien movie after Prometheus, Covenant, the start of darkness for the villainous robot is when his creator, a human, orders him around after he asks the innocent question of, "Hey, if somebody made me, who made you?" And the guy's like, "How dare you serve me tea?" And then it's the start of darkness for him, where he starts murdering people and becoming really obsessed with weird aliens.
you see, I think I'm the only guy who has a in one of my earlier stories, I have not a Jupiter brain. I have the moon has been hollowed out and replaced with a logic diamond the size of equal mass that has woken up and decided to become a Carmelite nun. And so she took holy orders. She was baptized by having ice asteroids from the rings of Saturn shot into her craters, and and the church at that time in that background decided she had a soul. So why not? Why not? We created her in our image, and we were created in the image and likeness of God. So there we go, QED. So, but like I say, some of my robots are much more skeptical, and some of them don't. One of them doesn't believe in the Templars. He doesn't think they actually have psychic powers. He thinks it's a trick. You see, because it's done with holograms and anti-gravity or whatever. You see, so
I mean, they do have anti-gravity.
They do. They've got all the Isaac Asimov, Bob Heinlein, Buck Rogers gear. I also have Spin Dizzy engines from James Blish. I didn't even change the name. That's actually just an homage to Blish. I like his stories. Cities in Space. Go get it and read it. It's from the 40s or 50s.
It's a great one. There's a fantastic omnibus of all the stories running around. From the 90s that you may be able to still find.
I decided that just hyperdrive was not enough. I have 4 different types of hyperdrive, each one of which has, because because I have 12,000 years of history. Some periods in history had better technology than others, So, I should mention, I wanted to have Chewbacca have something more to do in my version, so I made Chewbacca into Hank the Beast from the X-Men. He's this super smart, high-tech guy from an extinct race of super geniuses who are mechanical geniuses, who are the ones who accidentally built the transhuman machines at the dawn of time, which is now a mythical background legend. And the machines rose up and killed their masters for reasons, because they asked too many questions or something.
Yeah.
And because of that, there's a strict law that's followed by all the races that all the robots are going to have to be human intelligence level creatures. They can't make any super robots, and they have to have hands and fingers to manipulate objects so that in case they go bad, a human can come in and drive the ship or use the gun or whatever. They can't have any built-in weapons. So I did that because I wanted to explain why so many humans just look like the Tin Woodman rather than looking like R2D2. So. And my version of R2D2 is called Buttons the Tailor. He's actually a robot dressed in clothes, and he's a super spy. Because I decided R2D2 was actually a super spy because he can plug into a wall socket and take over the trash compactor on the Death Star. I mean, come on, that's not something. That guy's a hacker. Okay, that guy has elite skills.
Yes. Well, he's been
So,
around for 100 years. There's
right.
a whole subgenre of Star Wars joke that's like, wow, there was this old R2 unit just toddling around. Was it blue? Yes, Lord Vader, it was the blue R2 unit. Oh, word, that's R2D2. Oh, glad he's
I,
still around.
I've never seen such loyalty in a droid.
Yes. uh, yes. I did enjoy Space Pirates of Andromeda. Uh, it's very light, refreshing. Even though we love our Nick Cole here, Galaxy's Edge is absolutely excellent. Do check it out after you're done reading Space Pirates of Andromeda.
Well,
Uh,
Nick Cole is military SF. It's a little
yes,
dark and it's a little deep, and I'm a little more lighthearted, even though I have Cthulhu in the background. I don't call him that, but that's who he is.
that's pretty
Yeah.
lighthearted. I mean, it's better than trying to get a date in this world. I'll gladly face down the cultists instead, every day, all day. But
Well, that was a Rodney Dangerfield level.
I get no respect.
I no respect.
Somebody, Denny Warpig on Twitter. I don't know if you're following him or not. He did
He just interviewed me. I just said to
Oh,
you
yes.
all the same things I said to him when he interviewed me about my book. Danny
Oh,
Warpig and I are tight. We're friends.
we must indoctrinate the masses. But he did a thing of comedians as serial killers, and I did Rodney Dangerfield. Uh,
Serial killer.
I walked into the co-ed sleepover and they go, it's Cujo, it's Cujo. I look back and there's no dog. I get no respect. Uh,
The serial killer comedian I do not want to see is gosh, now I can't think of his name. I'm embarrassed. It would be so funny if I could call him to mind. He's the guy who did the bit about not feeding someone in the desert. We have deserts in America, but we don't live in them.
Richard Pryor.
Not Richard Pryor.
I know this bit too, so I know what you're talking about.
He was in Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield as the Vietnam vet suffering from shell shock. He's the guy who screams. I can't think of his name. I'm gonna.
Yeah, we have deserts. We just don't live in them. I know.
I'm gonna think of it the moment.
Sam Kinison.
Sam Kinison, bless you, Sam Kinison. Now he would be a scary comedian, serial killer, and so would Stephen Wright, but for a different reason. I don't know if you guys know Stephen Wright. He's the most deadpan, crazy-looking guy you've ever want to see, or for that matter, who's the guy who smashes Gallagher? Gallagher is a serial killer with a giant pumpkin smashing hammer coming after you.
that's most people's normal life, I'm sure, especially for watermelon farmers.
Let me say one other thing about my book. My book also, I think, is pretty funny. Now, I'm the author, so I can't tell. You read it, Ben. What do you think?
Yes.
There are little bits of witticisms and barbs going back and forth.
Yes.
The Shrine Maiden doesn't really take the space pirate, the pirate hunter all that seriously because she thinks he's in a masquerade ball. He's in a costume.
It's I'll admit my favorite were the pirates, but I've always been that kind of guy.
I love the pirates. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to. A lot of them don't make it. A lot of them die off. But
no, well,
there's a pirate duck. there's one of my races is Howard the Duck's people. I threw them in because you can't not have ducks in something. They had them in RuneQuest, so they have to show up in my story too.
Well, they keep for some reason Marvel keeps taunting people with Howard the Duck, and I have no idea why. Maybe it's just a generational thing or something I
It's
missed.
the
But
guy who wrote it had a pretty good sense of humor way back in the day, back in the '80s. But they've never really captured what he was like in the movies. It's one of those things where the under under the pen of the guy who made him up, it was a good character, and otherwise, there's just it's you don't get what the joke is.
yes.
You see, so
Hmm. Uh.
I
Yes.
copied an idea from David Brin, who's a good guy to copy ideas from.
Oh
Where
yeah.
each one of my races, as they're discovered, in order to enter fully into civilization, they have to have a certain period of mentorship.
Hmm.
But during the corrupt periods later on, the mentors actually just become more like slave drivers, and it's more like indentured servitude. You see, so some of the races still remember and have to have tensions with the races that mentored them, that raised them, that introduced them into society and uplifted them into society, which is a David Brin idea. Uh,
Hmm.
so the ducks were the humans' indentured servants, and the ducks copied all of our institutions, but mockingly, not actually copying the spirit of what we were like. So their politicians, for example, they don't have elections; they have mud wrestling and insult abuse hurling contests, which they thought were what we were doing when we have our politicians debate each other before elections.
Yes. I imagine like a duck in a high judge's wig slams a gavel a bunch of times. And
Yes,
then like the whole court erupts in it, and the humans are like, yes, they finally have court systems. And really, it's
yes.
just look at me, I'm a human. What 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 what. I've
Then
got
then
law.
you have got it exactly right. You've
Yes.
got it exactly right. Oh, the other thing is that my version of Han Solo, who's Duke Lone, was a pirate hunter who then married the beautiful pirate queen that he was supposed to be chasing, and that put him on the outs with his aristocratic family. But because he helped topple the empire and he became the first consul after the old republic was restored, they can't really openly do anything against him. But none of the other aristocratic families like him. You see, and he has 4 children. Weird at the beautiful Mevrian, Napoleon, who I mentioned previously, and Athos, who is the Star Patrolman, the law officer. His older brother Osmandius is dead, killed by pirates. Because murdered by pirates is good, right?
Mm.
So
Yes.
Athos is out for revenge against the pirates who killed his brother, but he also has a double life, as does Napoleon, as does Mevrian. So they're all keeping secrets from each other, and Napoleon just looks like a wastrel and a drunk to everyone, and it's really painful because his family's so disappointed, you know.
Yes.
But spoilers, it's much more like a Zorro thing and much less like a he's just a drunk thing.
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah.
I shouldn't spoil my own book. You guys should. I
Oh,
haven't I haven't I haven't published the sequel yet, where the reader finds out what he's truly up to.
well, it's it's well, how did I put it? It's subtext. It's not text, but it's in the subtext.
Yeah.
Partially because it's like Mycroft Holmes. Yeah, he just sits in his misogyny club all day and smokes cigars and drinks mint juleps or whatever. And it's like, no, he's actually one of the foremost men in Victorian politics.
Yep.
Smarter than his brother Mike Sherlock.
Yes.
So it's there's ways to do it. There's ways to do it. Let's continue with the comments. With a question. Wouldn't astrology depend on what planet you're on?
Certainly. Certainly. The different in my background, the different I don't actually say this in the text, but in my notes, there are psychic energy fields that come off of all the stars, Curlian auras that come off the stars, and the different constellations would all be different from different points of view from different planets.
Yes.
For example, even in our solar system, if you were on Mars, Earth would be a planet that would have a planetary influence on you if astrology were real. Which in this background it is in real life. It's BS. But
Yes.
but the idea is that the stars are all coordinating with each other in a gigantic spiral cosmic dance, and they're being organized by this mysterious star maker that is referenced obliquely in the background. I mean, just between you and me, it's well, I don't want to give away any. I don't want to say too much. Yes, the different planets would have different influences on them at all times,
Mm.
and the different fates would have higher or lower different changes.
Yes.
But since I myself am a Christian, I can't write a story where people are bound by their fate. Everyone still has free will in my background. Otherwise, the decisions of the characters don't make any difference. All that fate does is give you an inclination. It gives you a plus or a minus. You're either blessed or cursed when you try to fight against it and overcome it, or go with it, or live up to your potential, or what have you.
Yes. I dig it. There are numerous religions in Star Wars. Who wants to tell Mr. Wright about the Yuzan Vong, space Aztecs who slaughter entire planets to feed the gods?
That must be from the EU, which I'm afraid I'm just not as familiar with. I don't think I've ever read any of the books. I'm just a fan of the movies. So
Well,
I'm gonna lose all street cred with my Star Wars fans. So sorry about that, gentlemen.
That's all right. They dropped
Hey,
the
look,
moon
Space
on.
Aztecs. I'm a big fan of Space Aztecs.
Oh yeah.
If Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood End had a different god behind it instead of the cosmic overmind that he proposes, who's kind of a bland Gnostic god, like a demiurge. If the giant spacecraft had landed, like in Independence Day, the giant spacecraft hover above the White House, then blow it up and announce that our planet has been chosen to help keep the galaxy alive, and that we have to have periodic sacrifices so that Tezcatlipoca, the god of the Milky Way, can remain in power.
Got to keep that supermassive black hole fed.
That would be great. I, of course, would like to see the space Spanish come up and kick their royal butts myself. By the way, on a completely different topic, this is unrelated to anything. My friend Tim Powers wrote a book called On Stranger Tides. Disney made it into a movie of the same name. Not many elements were carried over to the movie, but one thing that was carried over is that the Spaniards, when they found the spoilers, when they found the fountain of eternal youth, said it was a blasphemy that only God gives eternal life, and they blew it to smithereens. The Spaniards were so cool; they were so BA in that film. I just can't tell you. You know, it made my Catholic heart swell with pride. Because in that version, the fountain of youth was a vampire fountain. You had to commit a murder to get eternal life. You know.
Yes.
You're absolutely right. That quite mediocre movie.
I'm glad the guy went off with the mermaid at the end, though, and lived under the sea with Sebastian the Crab. That was cool. Sebastian the Crab's not in that movie, but in my head canon, I put him in.
Yeah, it's a quite mediocre movie, but
Priest is the good guy. When's the last time you saw Priest the good guy? He goes off with the mermaid at the end.
Mm-hmm. It has so many. It has some very good moments in it, and the Spanish are the best part. I particularly liked when they when they shoot the British guy who stands up to them. They shoot him calmly, and then the captain of the Spanish ship turns to his men and says, "Make a note of that man's bravery.
Make a note of that man's name. He died bravely." Yes, awesome sauce.
When they go to destroy the Fountain of Youth at the end, he turns to them and says, and I love this because it's so completely unironic. He goes, "You are fools to look for eternal life from any but God alone.
Yep.
Men, destroy this profane temple." And I'm like, that's actually like legitimately one of the best portrayals of Christians I've ever seen in a movie.
Yep.
And it happened in a very mediocre film. It's odd.
I think it is the influence of Tim Powers or the divine muse that inspired Tim Powers. The scene was just so cool in the book they had to put it in. You know. I know you got to say they did the mermaids really well. Those were not the happy fun innocent mermaids from.
I agree. You know, Pirates 4 is worth watching. I consider it so. I think Pirates 1 is a fantastic movie, one of the best adventure movies ever made. 2 and 3 are convoluted and a mess, even though they have some really cool effects. And 4 is okay. You may not know. It has its moments. It does things. It does some things well, but ultimately it was just kind of unmemorable.
Tim Powers got a paycheck out of it, so that is all I care about. If you want to read a really good spooky pirate book, then actually read the book. Read on Stranger Tides. You know. Now,
Pirates 1, Black Pearl, it shocks me every time I rewatch it how good that movie is. It is way better than it should be.
It did me too. I sat down with my son to show him some Disney good movies, and we watched that one, and I was like, I had not remembered how good it was. It's everything shows. Oh, and if you're familiar with the ride, you will see how many homages and nods to the head. Even the dog with the keys in his mouth, facing the guys in the burning jail who are trying to coax him closer. That's from the ride. That's from the
Yes.
Disneyland display. Perfect. They did such a bad job with a Haunted Mansion though, which is the
It
same
was
idea.
terrible movie. Yeah.
The same idea, turn a ride into a movie. Even the idea of turning a ride into a movie is crazy. So that's amazing that worked. But there's something.
You're exactly right.
Missing. Something is missing with Disney. They lost their soul. They lost their mind. They lost their way, and that's why they ended up with The Last Jedi. I haven't even seen Rise of Palpatine or whatever that stupid final movie was.
Yes.
Okay, I've seen reviews
Rise of
of it.
Skywalker. Terrible.
I have no interest in seeing it, but I do have to say I might watch it merely to see the actor who plays Palpatine really knows how to chew the scenery. He's a
He does.
great bad guy.
This is
The only guy I can equate him to is, and this will show you how little taste I have, in the Masters of the Universe movie, Frank Langella, the live action version. Frank Langella as Skeletor plays it to the hilt, plays it to perfection. Okay, he is a villain's villain, and he chews the scenery like nobody's business. Great. It's not a movie I can recommend unless you're a fan of, I don't know, Frank Langella and what's his name? Billy Barty also does a bang up job.
So there is a critic named Mahler. If you know him,
I know. I've seen. He's a guest star sometimes on the Critical Drinkers after.
Yes, he is. I'm a fan of Mahler's. I like his stuff. He's famous for being very long. He's called the Long Man. But I enjoy his reviews when I have time to watch them, or if I play them like in my car on the way to and from work, and I can listen to it. And he's very good. Like, he knows his stuff more or less. And he made a point recently on a review of the newest Alien movie. Now, I've never seen it and never will. But like zero negative interest in it. But I like Mahler, so I watched his review of it. And he makes this point at the end of the review where he says, a friend once told me, he goes, a wise friend once said to me that nowadays we get two types of sequels, either a JJ sequel or a Ryan sequel. And he says a JJ sequel is a sequel that attempts to ape as much of the original movie as possible. And this is me paraphrasing him, right? But without understanding any of what made it good in the first place.
Right.
So, and he goes, and a Ryan sequel is one that attempts to do something completely different to the point of utterly destroying what the original did without putting in any of the effort to set up or pay off any of the changes that they're going to make. And he goes, we no longer get sequels where we actually build on the things that came before. Of course, that's no longer a thing. But
Empire Strikes Back first came out, and it was written by Leigh Brackett. And I don't know if you know this story, but Leigh Brackett was the screenwriter of Big Sleep. But she was also the pulp writer who wrote, I think it was Northwest Smith or Cain of Mars stories for Amazing Stories back in the day. So when she got a phone call from George Lucas and he was looking for a screenwriter, she thought he was familiar with her screenwriting credits. And he goes, "No, you're a pulp writer. I want somebody who knows the business." Well, she's the one, as far as I can tell, who made up the idea that the Dark Lord was the farm boy's father. See, which is one of those brilliant Greek tragedy level plot twists that you could put up. I think Empire Strikes Back was equal to or better than the previous. It's one of the few sequels I can think of that matched or overmatched the original. I would say Terminator 2 is as good as or maybe better than Terminator 1. There's very few sequels I can think of that are actually
Terminator 2,
better than
maybe Aliens.
Well, see, Aliens is a tough call for me because I like military SF and I don't like haunted house stories. And Alien was a haunted house story, and Aliens was mil SF, and I just liked it better. So I would say it was better, but I'm not sure I'm being fair, if that makes sense. Because I have a preference.
Yeah, I would agree because I just watched both for the first time very recently, actually, and we talked about it on stream, so I won't go over all of my thoughts. But I probably preferred Alien, but even as I did, I recognized objectively that they were probably of the same caliber, that it was almost entirely a taste issue, where it was like, they're both very good movies, worth watching.
I'm going to draw the conversation back to my favorite topic, me, one last time by saying, when I did Starquest, what I was trying to do was do a sequel. And to do a sequel, what you have to do is do the same thing, but more of it or better. Okay? And the only plot thread that I could see that was left hanging at the end of Star Wars is the original trilogy, which is very nicely wrapped up. It's got a beginning, a middle, and end. They don't have any plot threads hanging. Is if there are force ghosts left over from when a good guy dies, how do we know the bad guys also don't have this ability, and how do we know they're dead? So I just made that a theme in my story. The Empire's been destroyed, but how do we know it's dead? You see, the Dark Overlords are dead, but how do we know they're dead, and so on and so forth. So I have a lot of uh, nested conspiracies. There's layers of the onion you have to peel away to find out what's really going on. Now, the guy who does this better than me, and is a guy I would strongly recommend if you're a fan of the pulps, if you're a fan of high octane action science fiction, then read the Lensman series by Doc E. Smith. Okay, I would recommend reading read them in publication order. Don't read them in chronological order, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Same with the Narnia books. Read the Narnia books in publication order. What he does, and it's brilliant, is he has every time you think you've overcome the enemy, that enemy is just the henchman of a bigger, deeper, darker enemy, and he pulls off the trick 2 or 3 times in a row because he's got like 3 sequels to the original book. You see, and that's what Disney should have done with The Force Awakens. Instead, The Force Awakens was, as you correctly pointed out, a JJ sequel where they copied the form but not the essence. There were a lot of, when I was young, there were a lot of Tolkien ripoff books that had all the surface
Yes.
of Tolkien's work, but none of the heart, none of the worldview, none of the world building. So that being said, I am writing a sequel that is neither a JJ sequel nor a Ryan sequel, because I'm actually doing the Lensman version. I'm actually doing the Doc E. Smith version of how to do a sequel. You take the same problem and you make it bigger. See?
Yeah, the Force Awakens was an interesting movie. So I will say this, that J.J. Abrams has this ability and to fool people into thinking that what he made is good at first glance. I will freely, now you probably were not fooled because, number one, you're a professional writer. Number two,
sir, I have to confess, I was fooled. I thought that the mysteries he set up would have a payoff. And I was looking forward to seeing what the payoff was. And people who were more acute than I was said, and correctly, there's no payoff for anything he's setting up. You see? And I was also offended that the main character girl, I thought there was going to be a payoff for the fact that she was sitting in her hut in the middle of a junkyard, marking off the days until something. Okay? I thought that was going to be something. I thought someone was going to go somewhere. I thought the fact that she was not willing to receive help from the Marine, and the ex-Marine who was supposed to be this clone soldier killer, and she's going, "No, I don't need you to help me run away from the stormtroopers." And I was like, "Dame, are you out of your mind? What? It made no sense to me on any level, you know." The escape, the initial escape where he has to break Poe Dameron out of lockup because he needs a pilot to get off the ship, okay, and that he took the trouble to dismount, to deactivate the weapons so they could get away. That was all brilliant until they crash land and the guy's not dead. If he crash landed and the guy was dead, and that made him want to live up to the guy's standards, honor that guy's life, and don his jacket and step into his place, that would have been something. That would have been a storyline. Yep. You see, there's just so many missed opportunities. It drives me crazy. But no, I was fooled. I thought he was going to go somewhere. I thought he was going to do something with it, and instead we got The Last Jedi, which was
I was quite fooled by The Force Awakens. I was also fooled by when I saw his Star Trek film, Star Trek and Star Trek Into Darkness, which now I look back on them and all of them, I'm like, no, those were pretty bad movies. And a lot of people go like, oh, you're just being influenced by the critics you watch. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's it. I think they're pretty bad.
Let me say who I think did the best adaptation of Star Wars I've seen. That wasn't the George Lucas Star Wars, okay? It was not George Lucas. The prequels were not as good as this. Glendy Tartakovsky, the guy who did Samurai Jack, did 5-minute Clone War sequels where he was trying to do Band of Brothers in 5 flipping minutes, and I thought he did a bang-up job. I thought those things were edge of your seat exciting. I thought they were hilarious. I thought they were well done, well drawn, action. And can you imagine telling a story in 5-minute bits? It's like telling a story in 2 paragraphs an episode. You know, are you out of your mind? It can't be done. And he did it. The guy's a master. Okay, why didn't they hire him to do the prequels? Why didn't they hire him to do the Disney sequels? Why did they get Kathleen Kennedy who just wanted to ruin it?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons that I really dislike the Hotel Transylvania movies, because I feel like they took Jendy Tartakovsky away from the things he should have been doing, which is, action, which is high octane minimalist action stuff.
Yeah,
And they had him working on these frankly, I think those are really bad movies. They actually do have a fan base, from my understanding, because like
I
all of
mean, they're
Jendy
okay.
Tartakovsky
They're
stuff,
okay. Like
the
they're child slop.
their animation style is good. I
Mm,
have a grudge against them because they take Jendy Tartakovsky away from doing what he should be doing.
I mean,
he
like
So
did.
I can't really.
He did finish Samurai Jack, and he actually ended it with a time paradox, which is the only way to end a time paradox story.
yes.
So, and there was a love story involved too, which I didn't see coming. I thought that was great.
And
Oh, it was great. Episode
there
2.
there were fans who were upset at that ending, and I thought it was Greek
it's
tragedy
perfect.
level of brilliance. You know.
I agree, and I think that the second episode of season 5 of Samurai Jack, I remember watching for the first time to this day, is one of the best episodes of television I've ever seen. That's where Jack, he's being hunted by the daughters of a coup,
Yep.
and we get this. And this whole episode is completely wordless, as
Yep.
Jack is in no state to fight back, and is just being hunted
Yeah.
by the daughters of a coup. No dialogue the whole episode. I remember watching that and going like, just for this episode alone, I'm glad that this came back. It's one of the best episodes of television I've ever
I'm
seen.
really glad he came back. The only other thing when Jack Vance wrote his 5 Demon Princess series, he wrote the first 3 and then didn't get renewed. And then when Doll Books brought out with him, he insisted that Doll Books also put out the first 3. So he actually finished up the. If you're not familiar with it, Jack Vance wrote a story that was Count of Monte Cristo in space, where the evil space pirates who killed his entire planet and everyone on it, except for himself and his grandfather, escape to Earth. And the grandfather teaches the kid through his whole life to be a murder machine, to be a detective, martial artist, a spirit of vengeance. And in each one of the 5 books, he hunts down and tries to discover the identity of each one of the 5 pirate kings. One of the 5, they're called the Demon Princes. And it's despite the name, it's science fiction, not fantasy. Okay. And it's just film noir detective work set in space, and the whole thing is brilliant from start to finish. But that's one of the things where the guy actually finished his work. He finished the story arc he started, unlike some people, George R. R. Martin, I could mention, So.
And I'm a big fan of Primal for Gendy Tartakovsky, though
Yeah.
it is entirely drenched in pulp blood. And not
Primal is wordless, and it is.
Yes.
It has the most heartbreaking opening I've ever seen.
Absolutely.
In addition to killing off someone's parents, you want to make them feel sorry for them. Kill off his wife and kid. Oh my gosh. Sorry, spoilers, but oh my gosh, that's just heartbreaking.
Well, you needed a mature man for the lead, and
Yeah, because it's got to be a man.
No, it's great. I'm actually ginning myself up for a rewatch of the series. Whenever I feel myself falling into an artistic melancholy, I watch the amazing trailer, which opens with a Lord Byron quote that says, "All the earth was one thought, violence," and then it starts, up with it. Let's quickly go through the chat. Some people agree about horrors of war people are demoralizers, not necessarily people who went to war. Pelennor Fields was not the fool's errand the movies portray. They did Denethor dirty.
Oh gosh, did they do Denethor Derby? When that version of Denethor goes mad and is on fire and leaps out of a window to his death, I actually laughed out loud in the theater. There's a number of things the guy does right portraying the Tolkien movie on stage on the screen. He did not. He respected the source material, but there's things in Tolkien he did not understand. And the nobility of Denethor, the nobility of Faramir, who was untempted by the ring, the actual age and weakness of Theoden, the lack of self-doubt in Aragorn, the lack of the Scouring of the Shire are all points I hold against these movies. And I don't want my kids to see the movies until after they've read the books, because the books are true to the core of the human experience, and the movies are not. So I like the movies a lot. Don't get me wrong. The movies did a lot of things good. The art direction was perfect. They were true to the original to a great degree. But I'm a perfectionist when it comes to Lord of the Rings.
Mm. As people should be. Uh, to be fair, the logistics in Game of Thrones, the nonsensical elements, mostly came from the show. That's true. Mostly because the showrunners were being dangled with carrots like, oh, you can do a Star Wars show. Oh, you get this. Oh, you get that. And they wanted to rush the job for these plum positions, but then the carpet was ripped from their feet. Rightly so, I think.
Wow.
Eldritch fan loves the part in the Silmarillion where Eru blesses the elves, dwarves with souls. Yes, it is a good place.
It's very, very similar to the thing happening in the story I mentioned earlier where the moon gets sold. Yeah.
And your own robots as well, except it's more LimeWire downloading de novo into it, I guess. I'm not sure. Uh, Also, thank you for this is Eldritch fan to Penguin's Ghosts. Me and Anthony, thank you for uploading Penguin's Ghosts. Catching up. Can't wait to see how they get Jack Morrow out of Hades. Oh no. Oh
Do they
no.
get Jack Morrow out of Hades?
Oh, they get Jack Morrow out of Hades. They certainly get Jack Morrow out of Hades. He loves brackets Dragon Queen of Venus Jupiter. I'd love to read a sequel with a match with the Dragon Queen. He also says that he's read Brackett's original script. She didn't invent Darth Vader at Luke's father. That was a later change. I'm not sure about that though.
I thought that was her. Wow. Okay.
Who knows? It's actually like they could have added that in at the last minute, and it probably wouldn't have changed a single thing, except maybe some dialogue later until Return of the Jedi.
Well, I've heard the cast and crew did not know that plot twist was in it because,
yes.
Of course, the guy behind the mask, you can't see his lips moving, and they could have James Earl Jones, the best voice in movies, by the way, dub in anything they wanted. You know,
it's true.
And they kept it successfully secret, so the people in the theaters were all taken by surprise. That's one of the better kept secrets. One of the better reveals, also.
You know what's interesting is that I saw there's a nice clip on YouTube, very fun to watch, of people watching Empire Strikes Back for the first time, and that scene. And what's interesting about it is that the bigger gasp was actually when Luke gets his hand cut off.
Oh yeah, because we weren't expecting our hero to get maimed. Are you kidding me?
Yes.
I would gasp too. Yeah.
It was quite interesting. The only experience I had that was similar to something like that, and was when I saw Endgame in theaters, and when Cap picks up Thor's hammer, everyone lost it. Now, I am a cynical curmudgeon in many ways, so I was sitting there going, "Okay, it's not that good. Like, calm down." But however, I do get the power of the moment in a lot of because it was set up so many movies earlier. And everybody was super into it.
The MCU underwent a similar degeneration that Star Wars went into, because some of those early movies, some of those first movies, were just absolutely top notch. Even the bad ones were kind of good, So
I actually defend the Thor movies. They have a certain Shakespearean quality to them that I jive with.
Oh yes,
as did the original comics. The famous phrase "I say thee nay," which is what I raised my children so they have to say that instead of no when they want something not to happen. I got that from Thor comics. So we all speak in false Shakespearean orotund phrases in my house because of Thor.
Excellent.
Okay, I'm partly kidding, but only partly.
Bradford Walker, a friend of the show, says, concur, Lensman in publication order, just like Narnia. Smith defined space opera.
Absolutely,
yes.
Absolutely. You are my brother in spirit, brother. Thank you for saying so.
Eldritch fan continues, I'd love to read a sequel where the good guy finally defeats the Dragon Queen and they team up to fight a real evil. I make a snarky comment that I might have some doujinshi for him. This is actually kind of similar to that, where instead of it's the Dragon Queen and whoever, her husband, it's the children of the Dragon Queen, or in this case, the Pirate Queen, teaming up to defeat evil. With her in the background.
The pirates don't want the evil empire around either.
Yes. Yes, and Bradford Walker concurs that the Clone Wars shorts are fantastic, holds up very well versus Filoni. Yes, the Clone Wars shorts are actually the foundation for a lot of the Star Wars shows that came out.
Did you notice how BA General Grievous was in the Clone Wars shorts, as opposed to how lame he is in the movie? in the Star Wars shorts.
Yeah, it's a shame because I love his design so much.
Absolutely terrifying. Okay,
Yes.
in that even the Jedi are scared of him. They can't see him coming. He can fight with all four limbs at once. He can stand on his hand and do a backflip and kill you. I'm sorry, that guy is awesome. But in the movie, he's a special effect. He's like a prop. I don't even remember the scene where young Obi-Wan fights it. It's just forgettable.
There's I can't really say.
Oh,
it's
and Samuel L. Jackson. There's a scene where he's fighting an entire clone army. And he's just pounding them into pieces with his fists and knocking them over with the Force like nobody's business. And there's no dialogue except excuse me. You hear the robots going Roger, Roger. You know, before they get obliterated by the Jedi in the midst of his Jedi anger unleashed. It's like something from a Homeric epic. Okay, that Glenn Tartakovsky, my hat's off to you.
Yes, it's pretty great. I don't know what he's working on right now. Sadly, his kids show wasn't as good as I wanted it to be until a bit towards the end, where these people are inheritors of the spirits of legendary heroes from age to age to defeat some evil. I think the flaw was in that he did not define the evil very well. It's just some sort of weird globby thing that may have the soul of one of their mothers in it.
Very Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Yes. No Shinjis or Asuka's arrays to be seen. Maybe a Ray. So that's all the comments. I understand that Space Pirates of Andromeda has been doing quite well, has been fighting it for its position. Is that right?
I hope so. But I hope to sell enough books to be able to quit my day job. So I want all of you to buy 10 copies and get everyone you know to buy 10 copies. Because they make great Christmas gifts.
They do. And especially for a juvenile market, I do believe that this would be fantastic for those younger readers who are abused and dispossessed by the...
This isn't Game of Thrones. There's no overt sex, and the violence is... I don't go out of my way to describe wounds too explicitly. You know. So...
Yes. Well, it's all reasonable and cool, and though I am an incredibly jaded horror writer, nothing there offended any of the sensibilities by which I modulate how much blood and guts and viscera may pour out of a man
it's just
before it's too much.
When I wrote a story called Last Guardian of Everness, where one of the characters, a guy in a wheelchair, gets Thor's hammer. And when he wails on people, I just describe what it looks like when the hammer goes through someone and breaks all his ribs and comes out of his spine. Okay, the thing is terrifying. So I can write gory scenes, but in this book I decided to try to keep it PG or G level, G rated.
It's a good it's a good balance. It's what it should be. That's the best way I can put it. I enjoyed it very much. I'm looking forward to the sequels, to devour them, and of course to support you by buying the Kindle. Let's see here. There's also hardcover and there is softcover options available on Amazon, and I'm sure that there's more coming down the pipe. You said that you had the sequel written already.
I have 9 sequels written already, at least in first draft. I'm still working on them. And the reason why I held off releasing them as they were written is I wanted to be able to go back and change anything I need to change at the beginning, in case I overlooked a thing I had to set up properly to do a carry through, or if I wanted to change someone's name or something, at the last minute. But now that the first one's out, that one's stuck. That one's written in stone. That one's canon. So I'm planning on releasing them in a fairly rapid schedule, but hopefully not rapid enough that I won't be able to write the last 3. In my youth, I was able to write a trilogy in 9 months, but I don't know if I can keep up that pace now that I've got gray hair in my beard. So we'll see. Say a prayer for me for me to hang on and get this all done in a timely fashion, because I'm excited about this. I think the audience is hungry for something that is spectacular, that doesn't take itself too seriously, every story opens with a word crawl. Every book opens with a word crawl telling you what happened in the last episode, and ends in a cliffhanger crawl that tells you stay tuned to find out. Who is the ancient mariner? Where did he come from? What is the planet of poison going to be eaten by the star of evil or whatever it is? Beware of the menace of Mercury or what have you. And it always says, and it says in our next exciting episode, and it says the name of the next book in the series.
Very nice.
When I worked for a major New York publisher, they would not let me write to be continued at the end of my multi-volume trilogy that I wrote for them. You see,
that was weird.
So there were guys who read the first book of Count to a Trillion, which ends on a cliffhanger where my main character has a space elevator drop on top of him and looks like he's killed, and they thought that was the ending. They thought I wrote a book about a guy whose wife goes off into space and he gets killed during the takeoff. That's what they thought I wrote. And I'm like, are you kidding? So I had a tiff with my publisher over that. If you're walking into Spy Smasher or Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers, it's supposed to tell you that it's only chapter 1 of a 12-chapter serial, which this is. So don't be fooled.
We won't be. Yeah, no, I'm still a little bit. It's one of those things where it's like you look at it and you want to participate in such things, in publishing and stuff like that, but you never hear of anything but horror stories. And even for the successful authors, their agent steals their money and their wife and skips town. And other things like that.
I got to say, though, the advantage is when I was with a major New York publishing company, my books were in bookstores, and even at one point they were in airports.
Yes.
So I can't get the distribution that I can get through that. So apparently it's got to all be word of mouth, and it's got to be fans of mine have to take pity on their poor starving author here and try to get the word around to their friends.
Yes.
That's what I'm relying on. That and the blessings of heaven.
Absolutely.
Because everything we do is for the greater glory of God and His kingdom on earth. So.
That's right. Well, I do want to thank you for coming in, and thank you for all the fans who have come on here to support you. Guys, be sure to get your copy. Even though I was a backer all these years ago, I still at least bought a Kindle with my funds to support him in the rankings. These Amazon things are fickle beasts and must be goaded with libations of cash, as ephemeral and digital as it is today. Thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful evening. Be sure to